So we're continuing through the first letter of John. We're already up to the fourth chapter of the letter. And what we're looking at, of course, is the continuing of the focus on love. And this is where we get the basic understanding that the whole focus of our faith is to love others. There it is, right then and there. And this is one of the issues that I deal with regularly, because many people will tell you our focus is morality. Now, we believe in morality, obviously, but morality is important. But remember what I always say, you can be an atheist and follow Catholic morality. In fact, as I've said before, Daniel Dennett, who is now retired, but he was a world-class atheist from England. I don't know why so many of these outspoken atheists are British, but for some reason they are. I don't know. So in any case, he's another British atheist. He was teaching at Tufts University mathematics. And what he would always say is you don't have to believe in God to know right and wrong. Essentially, that is true. So that's why I always like to, raise a red flag when people sum up living our faith as living morality, because you don't have to believe in God to live morality, with some exceptions. But you do have to believe in God to love to the level that Christ calls us to love, and understand that difference. There's a heck of a difference between loving another person and choosing not to rob a bank. Do you understand? I mean, you can turn around and say, well, I'm not a bad person, I don't rob banks. And people can turn around and say, well, you have a point there. But Jesus doesn't call you not to rob banks. That's part of it. He calls you to love another person. And to love others. And how do you love others? You do what is best for them within reason, but sometimes that forces you to sacrifice something for yourself, of yourself, so that you may help another. It could be a minor thing, could be a major thing, and a minor thing, but it's still an act of love, actually. If you're waiting in the supermarket and you've got a whole shopping cart. What's this? What is it? A wagon. Some people say, well, get a wagon. That's England. We don't speak like that. At least not here in New England. I hear that. Go get a shopping wagon. What the hell is that? We don't have those here. Oh, a shopping cart. That's what we call it. So, and anyway, shopping carriage is another word we use. We don't use wagon. Don't say that. That's English. That's British English. I'm sorry. You can say anything you want. But anyway, there you got someone who's got one of those little handheld baskets that's got like 3 items in it, and you've got a whole shopping carriage or shopping cart full of all your groceries, and you let the person go ahead of you. That's an act of love and self-sacrifice. You could just turn around and say, the heck with you, I'm going to do things my way. And that's the difference. Now, you don't have to believe in God to know the difference between right and wrong. So you don't have to believe in God to know the difference between robbing a bank and not robbing a bank. But if you're going to go the extra mile, which is what Christ calls us to, then you have to know the difference. And you have to choose to serve God in such a way that you're doing something different. And that involves loving another person. And that's very strong in families, obviously, because families are rooted in love. But what is love? Doing what is best for the other person. So we all know that parents sacrifice for their children. Now, there are some that don't. And I'm not saying they're Catholic parents or Christian parents by any stretch of the imagination. And this brings up something that's important, because there are people who really struggle against sin and have no understanding that they are good people and literally probably will be welcomed by God into the kingdom of heaven, and they think they're not good enough. And they have not encountered some of the most evil people in the world, which in my job I do occasionally. It's absolutely true. I encounter some really evil people in my own job. And so here they are saying, I could have been a better person. Yeah, you could have been, but let me tell you, you are nowhere near what is a worse person. And the worst person will not do anything in the lines of loving someone else, but they will be doing things in the lines of like robbing someone else. Let me give you an example. You might have a person who gets all upset with themselves because they're not doing anything as well to the level that they think they should. So say, for example, the example I have used in the past, I'll use it again. We'll say someone who accidentally eats meat on Friday during Lent. In other countries in the world, it's mandatory. You can't eat meat for Friday at any time during the year, with, I think, Easter is the exception. But here in the United States, you can't eat meat during Friday during Lent. You're supposed to do something else as penance on Fridays, but it doesn't have to be meat. And one of the reasons is because, let's face it, so you walk into your favorite fast food restaurant and you go, well, I'm not going to have a hamburger, I'll have a fish burger, or I'll have pizza or something. I mean, it's very easy for us not to eat meat, and that was the whole thing they were talking about. But you have someone who's beating themselves up because they ate meat on Friday by mistake. They forgot it was like the first Friday in Lent, and they had eggs and bacon and eggs, and they forgot, and they just get all, beat themselves up. I've dealt with extremely evil people. And I'm not just talking the typical evil person. So, wow, this guy murdered 3 people. Well, that's a typical evil person. You want to look at someone who's an evil person? Yep, we can say that's him. But I'm talking people who do a different kind of evil that is still evil, but probably isn't even unheard of among all your friends and relatives. I knew a guy who named all his children, gave them all the same name so he could steal their IDs. You understand, you have to look at that. When they were born, they got the same names. And somehow, this is the way they all ended up with the same names. So that he had it all planned out. In the future, he could steal their IDs. That's pretty evil. But how many people who are listening to this program right now would have any clue that there are people that actually do that? Do you see what I'm saying? So when you're beating yourself up because maybe you ate meat in Lent and you forgot when you weren't supposed to eat meat, and you're saying how awful a human being I must be. Oh, no. I'm telling you that there are some pretty awful human beings out there. Another thing that I've dealt with, remember what I always say, what is the source of evil? I want my world my way. And I'm going to do anything I can to get my world my way. That is the source of evil. It always will be the source of evil. The most evil people are the people who are trying to build their world that way, their way. If you want to think of what hell might be instead of fire and brimstone and all the other stuff, I'm going to tell you, one of the things it would be a whole group of people all trying to make the world the way they want it, and everyone else stands in their way, who are also trying to make the world that they want it, and it would be a living hell. That's probably what hell really is like, just people who are constantly fighting to get the world their way. And, there are people that do not understand how evil is, but I have encountered people like that. And, I've encountered people who are just so hard-hearted, and I'm not talking hard-headed. Those are just people who are, you can't convince them anything. You just forget it. That's not being hard-hearted. That's being hard-headed. You turn around and I don't know. You try to explain to them that electricity is still made from oil, And they think if everything runs on electricity, then then the world will never be depleted with oil. And you go, no, it doesn't work that way. And then no matter how hard you tell them about this, they can't be convinced. That's being hard-headed, but that's not hard-hearted. They could still be some of the most loving people in the world, just not the brightest bulbs in the circuit as we go. I remember I taught a Brazilian one time, the American expression, she never had heard that. His elevator doesn't go all the way to the top. And she thought that was the funniest thing she had ever heard. She was having trouble with someone who didn't like Catholics and was giving her a hard time and everything. And I said, ooh, his elevator doesn't go all the way to the top. And she thought that was the funniest thing she had ever heard. She had never heard that expression before. Yeah. But, you might find that some very, very nice people, some very kind people, loving people whose elevator doesn't go all the way to the top. But that's not sinful. That's not a problem. It's the people who are hard-hearted. I want my world my way. I don't care. Now, I'm going to make a very strong difference in this. I don't care what the church teaches. I'm going to do things my way. That's radically different from I'm trying to live church teaching and I find at times it's just impossible. I can't do it. It's so difficult. Okay, I can show you in church teaching how the situation you're describing is well known in the church, and that's okay. That's why we have the tools that we have. That's okay. We can work with that. But the other one who says, I don't care what the church says, I'm going to do things my way, and too bad. That's someone who becomes hard-hearted, and the hard-heartedness can lead to intense amount of evil, but not an evil like they go out and rob banks. It's an evil like they don't care who they hurt or whom they hurt, pardon me. They don't care whom they hurt. They don't care whom they whose life they destroy. They're going to get what they want, and they don't care about anybody else. That is that kind of evil that most people do not see, right? And how do we make sure we're not that kind of evil person? Be people of love. And one of the aspects of love is to sacrifice. Now, no one is going to sacrifice who seeks what they want and plays that whole evil game. No one is going to sacrifice, no one, to benefit another person if they are so selfish and evil. So that's one of the things you need to do. You need to understand that the Lord is, don't get so caught up in the rules that you miss the whole point. What is it that John says? To love others. Well, what does love mean? As Father Herbert McCabe teaches, Dominican, if I learned from one of the guys over at the Uncharted Catholic Man podcast, Discord. What does he say? He brings up Herbert McCabe, and what a Dominican priest from England. He's passed away now. What does he teach? He teaches something very simple, that loving is doing what is best for another person that may require a sacrifice. Do you know, kind of think of it this way. Husband and wife called to love each other, and obviously they do. The act of going to the supermarket and shopping for your spouse is an act of love. Oh, this is nice. This is what so-and-so loves these kind of things. By the way, a little bit out for Christmas, we did a Yankee swap. And you know what I won in the Yankee swap? A fine product from Massachusetts. A tub of fluff. I have discovered 2 tablespoons of fluff, which are 40 calories. That's it. 40 calories. On a pita bread inside the pita, oh, make my day. Half a pita, oh, make my day. Little things. So I've learned how to do this. So if I want to do a loving act to another person, I could make one of those fluff and pita sandwiches. Oh, it is literally the old expression, to die for. Yeah, it is. So anyway, but doing those loving acts, That's what we're called to do, and that leads us to be more and more loving. Now, I've been down the other path too. Oh, wouldn't it be nice if I bought so-and-so these nice potato chips, and you buy them and they go, oh, you got the wrong type. No, they weren't expecting. Just go, oh, I got these just for you. Oh, yeah, but I wish you got the others. That's not loving. That's not receiving things in love. Those people tend to lean down the path of narcissism, and they're difficult. But yeah, you doing the loving act is very powerful. We're going to talk more on the other side of the break. You're listening to the Catholic Audio Media Podcast. We'll be right back right after this. Did you know that the Catholic Audio Media Podcast is available on various podcast platforms? You can find us, among others, on Podbean, which is our home platform. You can find it on Spotify, Amazon Music, iHeart, among others. Just look for Catholic Audio Media, all one word. On some platforms, such as Spotify, look for Catholic Audio Media, 3 words, and subscribe and listen to the Catholic Audio Media Podcast. Don't forget to subscribe to us on Patreon, patreon.com/Catholic Audio Media, patreon.com/Catholic Audio Media. Check us out. Check what we have to offer, previews of upcoming podcasts, previews of upcoming columns over at catholicaudiomedia.substack.com, your ability to comment, make suggestions, even make suggestions in upcoming programs. Check us out, patreon.com, Catholic Audio Media. As we continue through this reading and we look it over, we see, the powerful thing that, remember, God is love. So that's why you want to be in touch with God, touch with love, because God is love. And that's the whole reality of Jesus dying on the cross. Why did he die on the cross? Out of love for us, that we could be saved. He sacrificed himself that we could be saved. But he also sacrificed by doing full obedience to the Father. That's another form of sacrifice. Remember, in reality, Jesus did not want to die on the cross. Don't ever forget that. He didn't go to the cross going, oh, this is wonderful. I am happy to do this. He didn't. He said, let this cup pass me by, but your will to the Father, not mine. So he didn't want to do it, but he did it out of love for us in obedience to the Father. So that's the important thing to look at, that sacrifice. So, and it's interesting because one of the things that's coming out, there's a lot of big discussion now over socialism and capitalism. And the interesting thing is now the church is against socialism. We'll talk about what's happening in New York right now with the proposals by the new mayor, Mamdani, some of the socialist ideas. Some of his ideas are good, but the socialist ideas where we want to build a collective and we don't want anyone to have, he doesn't say it that way, but, just turning away from individualism and individual rights. The church believes everyone has the right to private property. That is one of the church teachings. So when you bring socialism that says that the state owns everything, that's not what the church believes. We don't stand for that. But they believe that everyone has a right. The church believes. But we also believe what I call voluntary socialism, which is if you have an excess of something, you have a duty to give that to somebody else. Right? Not some of that to somebody else. So anything you have an excess of, you need to share the wealth, so to speak. And whereas in capitalism, the way we experience it here in this country, it's really based on, taxes aside and everything else, but it really is based on make the most money, do the best you can, and really work to get everything out. And neither system is approved fully by the church. Capitalism is a very powerful system, but it has its flaws too. The old saying goes, it's the worst system in the world except for all the others. And that's why we don't believe in trying to make the most amount of money as being the object of our life. Our object of our life, instead of being the richest, is to being the most loving. And the most loving will suffer at times. The most loving parent is going to do what is best for the spouse and the children. Period. That's what they're going to do. And there's a story that the late Father Rufus Pereira used to tell of a man who had the opportunity to be like a very rich CEO. He was from India, so this was in India. A very rich CEO, and he realized his family would suffer, and so he said no. My own father was a newspaper reporter for the Boston Globe, as you know, back when it was owned by the Taylors. So, as I like to say, back when it was a prestigious newspaper. And and I work for the Globe too, but my father only wanted to be a reporter, and he was a reporter. That's what he was. He didn't want to be an editor. He didn't want to work his way up the ladder because he said he knew you'd have to step on toes if you did that. And he loved being a reporter. And that's what he was. And there were a lot of guys who were like that. A lot of the guys he worked with, they were reporters. Other guys there's nothing wrong with seeking to be an editor. And I mean, that's a talent people have, and that's an important talent. Nothing wrong with doing that. But he that's all he ever wanted to do. And so he never went into management. As a matter of fact, he was part of the union, but he never got into management because he loved doing what he did. And that's an important distinction. But you also realize that, people have that choice in life, but they also realize that one of the great things we must do is take care of our family if you have a family. And so that's the other part too. There's Black Pegasus? I don't know if I've talked about him a couple times. He has his own reaction channel. He's a hip-hop artist. And he stopped touring, or he doesn't tour as much, because he wanted to make sure he was taking care of his family. That's a big sacrifice, by the way. If you know anything about the music industry, touring is a major part of the music industry because you're supporting your music. And it has to be done more now than it was in the past. Back in the day when I was just a youngin', back in the 70s, when some of these reaction videos are covering all the songs we grew up with, well, they had albums. So you would go on, well, you wouldn't, neither would I, we were just kids, but the rock musicians at the time, big names that are now in their 80s and 90s, they would be out touring, and they would tour to support the album. So they'd have a new album out, and they would go out touring. And of course, you could get the album there, but then you'd go on tour, you'd go see this artist, and then you'd go to the local record store and you'd buy the record. Well, the record stores aren't around anymore, and record stores were cool. Tower Records was like heaven here in the Boston area. But back then you had these record stores, and the group would come in and they'd play, and then people would go to the record stores, or they'd buy them there at the concert, and that's how they supported their music and their sales. And that doesn't happen anymore because everything is online. It's all streaming. So what happens now is people will tour, and then the people will go home and they'll listen to the music through a streaming service. And instead of getting a percentage of the album, they get a percentage of the streaming music. And I think it's somewhere in the vicinity of 0.04 cents for every time you stream their music. So as you can see, I mean, I remember hearing that from a jazz artist when I was on the jazz cruise, and I forget who it was, gosh. And he was saying that it's something like 0.04 cents for every time you stream the music. But back in the day, you would buy the album, and they would get considerable more royalties from the album. And you also had music was album oriented. I used to watch the DJs up at WBCN. You could look at WBCN from the window, and you could look in, and you'd see them playing the records, and you'd buy the whole album. All of that has changed, but that was the deal of now. And so what's happening now is musicians do a lot of touring, and they do world tours and everything else. But a lot of times they do it to support themselves because the whole music industry has changed so radically. And I know one musician, wonderful guy, Catholic too, rock musician, he talked about, he talking to his family as to, what do you call it? Use online conversation and everything. I forget what you call it, but online connections with his children and with his wife and everything, because they have to be on tour to support their music and everything else. And this is very difficult for the musicians. It's very difficult for a lot of the people. And it's interesting, on top of all that, Black Pegasus decided to stop touring so he could care for his family, and less the financial aspect and more the being home aspect. It was kind of fascinating. So really something. He's a hip hop artist. Anyway, we're going to talk more on the other side of the break. You're listening to the Catholic Audio Media Podcast. We'll be right back right after this.
You can now leave a message for us, which we can air and discuss on this program. Just call 617-297-7452. That's 617-297-7452. 617-297-7452. Feel free to call, leave a comment, a question, or even feedback, and we may play it on the air. I can discuss your comment or question as well, so give that a try. 617-297-7452, 617-297-7452. Don't forget to subscribe to us on Patreon. Patreon.com/Catholic Audio Media. Patreon.com/Catholic Audio Media. Check us out. Check what we have to offer. Previews of upcoming podcasts. Previews of upcoming columns over at catholicaudiomedia.substack.com. Your ability to comment, make suggestions, even make suggestions in upcoming programs. Check us out. Patreon.com, Catholic Audio Media.
We're back, and so we've been talking about this whole aspect of sacrifice and love and everything else, and different ways of doing it. We were just talking about the concept of the Black Pegasus, who is chosen in order to support his family to take the sacrifice of not touring, which is, as I said, that's a big sacrifice for many of the musicians. But that doesn't mean anything about the other musicians that are touring, and it's just, this is the reality of it. The whole music industry has changed, and so there is the streaming of music. I guess maybe what Black Pegasus does is he's got his YouTube channel that does the reaction videos, and that helps financially. I'm guessing that. I have no idea. But there are different ways they support different sacrifices. So the ones who are touring are also doing sacrifice for their family, and that's what the touring part's all about, because the music industry has changed so much. So you have all this. It's all fascinating, but it's all about, back to what we were talking about, loving others, and that's doing what's best for another and living, doing self-sacrifice on your own part in order to help another. These are some pretty powerful things, and that's why be careful. That whole morality is the key, because you can be a moral person and not love anyone else. We'll be back tomorrow. Have a blessed day. The Catholic teaching in this podcast is reflected and presented as accurately as possible. The opinions expressed are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect those of the Archdiocese of Boston or any other institution.